Hey yo, welcome to the Race Report. I'm your colorful host, Jordan Brown. 2016 has been a very controversial year for America. The country has started to divide over racial issues involving viral police shootings, professional athletes kneeling, this year's presidential campaign, and much more. The division between these issues has caused protests and many different opinions to be expressed. Signs of a race war show up more and more as the year goes on. Here on the Race Report, I will dive into these issues, different perspectives of the issues, and the concepts surrounding racism. Now, racism has been an issue since America has been founded. It has not gone away in today's age, despite the blinding idea that it's not as prevalent as it has been in the past. There are three forms of racism: individual, institutional, and cultural. Individual involves attitudes and everyday behavior. Institutional deals with policies and practices of organizations where rules are created or into a social system. Cultural is the values embedded in dominant culture. People of color experience individual racism in many ways every day. The experience is through glances, gestures, forms of speech, and physical movements. Now, the perpetrators are not conscious of these actions while the victims still feel the pain. The over-attention to a person of color in the store, like Walmart, or even a racist joke told at a meeting are both examples. Now, institutional racism creates policies and practices that cause different advantages for privileges for people of a certain race, mostly white America. Now, many people understand the basics of concepts of racism, but I think as a collective we can all agree that racism is wrong. But there are still those who choose to be racist or choose to believe it isn't a serious issue. Now, I have one thing to say to those who don't. Wake up. If the last few years haven't already raised an alarm that racism and racial profiling have been out of hand, then I don't know what America you're living in. Now, back in 2012, a 17-year-old black kid named Trayvon Martin was visiting his father in Centraud, Florida. A neighborhood watch captain named George Zimmerman found Trayvon to be suspicious. After calling 911 to report him, Zimmerman was strictly told not to approach Trayvon. Zimmerman disregarded the instructions, and then he got into a physical altercation where Trayvon shot him in what he called self-defense. Zimmerman was charged with second-degree murder and was found not guilty. Trayvon Martin's life was taken, no justice was served because he was racially profiled and believed to be doing wrong by a man who had no right to be following him in the first place. Trayvon Martin was the same age as me at the time. He was like many of us young black men in America. Trayvon losing his life spoke to me and many Americans of color, as well as myself. The chapter-based organization Black Lives Matter was created in 2012 after Trayvon's death. It has been a call to action in response to the anti-black racism that perpetrates our society. For clarification, Black Lives Matter looks to start the conversation about black people initially left powerless by the hands of the state and their lives being deprived of their basic human rights and dignity. Now, as a young black man in America, this speaks volumes to me. When the Trayvon Martin murder happened, it made me think of all the everyday racism that I have dealt with in my life. At the age of 15, I was stopped down the street from my house and suspected to be a suspect in a crime. It was going fast, I couldn't see it.
Do you want to start that section over?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you guys want to start over the My Experiences segment? My Experiences, it's something like...
Yeah. Yeah.
It's H6.
Yep. There we go. Okay.
Do you have that one?
Yeah.
And a little bit slower.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll try to keep the same pace, because I know it'll change up a little bit, so I'll make it easier. All right. As a young black man in America, this speaks volumes to me. When the Trayvon murder happened, it made me think of all the everyday racism that I have dealt with in my life. At the age of 15, I was stopped down the street from my house and perceived to be a suspect in a crime. In the 3 years of going to a school in Nebraska, I've been perceived to be stealing at a sports store accompanied by my white friend. I've been called the N-word by 7 other white males while dining at a restaurant with a friend from home. I've heard girls say that they think my black peers are good looking, but don't want to affiliate with them because of their race. My white peers have witnessed how people look at me differently for walking around with them at public places. I've had to talk with multiple friends and girlfriends on what it means to be a black man in America. I've had multiple friendships where a parent or parents didn't approve of me because of my color. In reality, I've had it easy. I've come up from living in the suburbs of Kansas City. I've gone to and am currently attending a great school. There are many others who have had similar or worse environments than me, so I should be grateful. Now, to help me discuss the issues of racism and the concept itself, I'd like to present a special guest here on the show. She's a student at Hastings College studying sociology and a member of the New Black Student Alliance here on campus, Eunice Adupwe. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. So, to start our conversation about racism, I want to ask an important question to you. How big has racism been in your life?
I think racism is a huge component of my life, as well as many other black individuals, because it is the very first thing and very last thing that is seen on a black individual, because it is perceived that that makes you different, that makes you less than. And so because of that, racism has played a huge impact on my life. At the same time, racism does not define who I am, doesn't define my interactions with others, but it definitely does make me a little bit more cautious with those interactions. Yeah.
To my next question, do you believe racism is getting worse, or is there a chance that it's disappearing or maybe lessening in our country?
That's a tough thing. I think racism, the construct of racism, is one that will not leave our country. I believe that there are those who continuously work to keep it alive, and because of that, I don't believe it will die. At the same time, I do believe that there are steps towards improving that. I say that despite the situation we're currently in, despite the anger and weariness and just fear that a lot of black bodies are facing currently. But I think that despite that, there are a lot of individuals who are working to try and improve the state that we're in.
I know some people like to think racism isn't as a big issue as it should be, or as people make it out to be, but do you think that is to a blinding fact that maybe the everyday racism we have today has transformed into different other ways than has been in the past that people resemble?
Yeah, I think I try to think of racism in the sense that it's a man-made construct, right? And because it is a man-made construct, it benefits certain people. And because of that, it is exemplified or found in many different aspects. Racism can be found simply in the fact that when you wake up in the morning, at least when I wake up in the morning as a black body, I consider my race before anything. I consider how my race will impact my everyday lives. And that is everyday racism, that my own cognitive process of racism and how that, or race itself, and how that impacts me. And then there's racism when you hear people call you the N-word, or when there is a slight tendency to overlook black perspectives or diminish the existence of it because that is not a lived experience for those who are of white skin.
Yeah.
And that in itself is racism, because it shows that, or it diminishes the life of someone, diminishes those experiences for someone. It's like saying that person is lying. It's like, oh, I've never experienced this, so therefore it doesn't, you've delegitimized it because you as a white body have not experienced this. And that in itself is, to me, racism. And there's racism in the education system, in religion, in so many different aspects of life. And so that's why I think that racism is that construct that benefits certain individuals and leaves others to the dust. So,
when it comes to the learning or passing on racism, do you think the idea of racism is taught and learned, like in households with family or around friends?
I will say this. There are three different perspectives. There is one that is simple. A majority of the white population has become kind of numb or desensitized to the idea of racism still existing, or just simply blinded, like you used, because of the idea that people who look like you have hurt people who look like us. And because of that, the guilt and shame of that idea is often hidden or changed to mean something like being colorblind. If I'm colorblind, that means that it's the ignorance. Despite knowing that there are issues that face certain people, I can say that, oh, I've never, like, I never knew that you were a black person. I was colorblind to this idea. So it's the idea of ignorance is bliss. But ignorance, to me, is not a legitimate excuse, because there are things, evidence everywhere around us that show us that racism is a real thing. Now, in the Black American household, this is taught. This is something that is infused in everyday life, is taught at a very young age to children, because your skin is the very first thing that is seen. And it is a coping mechanism. It is armory in order to survive the world that we're in. Now, in the African household, it's much different. Despite it being a coping mechanism, despite it, all of those aspects, there's also language barriers, there's cultural barriers that play a huge part in that. So my perspective on the issue is very skewed.
Different
It's
than-
very different than
mine
that.
be,
Exactly.
being born and raised in America. Obviously, you have been born somewhere else and just come here.
Yeah.
And so you have.
So I had the dual
Yeah,
perspectives.
yes. As where
So,
I
yeah.
just have one, which I think that's also a thing to think about, as how does racism affect the different people of color? Because I think a thing that's discussed with mutual friends is that we still have the term used as African American, which I feel like me being called African American is kind of old fashioned. Like then we should call white people, Europeans.
Yeah.
But
That's another can of worms right there, but I definitely do see that struggle between those who are of African descent, right, living in America, or I consider them Black Americans or Americans, because adding the title of Black just means that there's an American that is better than Black American, or continues to categorize individuals and make them feel or focus on a perspective. There's this theory called agenda setting, agenda setting, or alter casting, which is this idea of persuading individuals to fit a social role. By titling Black Americans Black and American, you've already created this perspective for an individual. They can only view their lives through this perspective. And so that's why I struggle with this idea of African American, because I'm an African, but I'm not an American.
Yes.
And so it kind of creates more unnecessary boundaries and walls in order to categorize and separate individuals because of perceived background. But yeah.
I think as a positive awareness is a big thing for people, especially people who haven't even met a person of color before, which is people like that who go to school here with us at Hastings College. But I think like substance like films and shows are big ways of people to see things and experience things which they wouldn't experience in person. Like me, I think Boys in the Hood is a great movie. I think it's a great movie for people to watch too, because obviously we don't all live in a time as much as the kids perpetrated in the movie live in a time, such as people who are playing the characters like Ice Cube and such. But it's still great to see the concepts and ideas of racism towards African Americans and people of color. Do you know any shows or films or any other stuff that people should watch that is great awareness and education, even though it's entertaining as well?
That is a very tough question. It's kind of a loaded question too, because there's a theorist named Durkheim who says that the role of media, art, music, all these different aspects is not to improve a society, but rather to shape it. Now, the movies that we have watched as Black individuals are much different than that of other Americans. In the same way that the movies that I've watched as an African are much different than that of Black Americans. But I think that it's important to focus on the idea that you can gain a perspective but not understand. Despite watching, there are so many different things that we watch in the world that we can't personally connect to because we have never lived those experiences. But we can take in or at least absorb that knowledge, like you're saying, in order to help us look at the world differently. And as much as I want to say that movies are bad for the idea of like creating strong lessons for individuals, because everybody takes it differently. Everybody connects to different things in different ways. The same way that we could have watched Boys in the Hood and gotten two different perspectives, two different ideas of what that movie means. The same way that any other individual without that lived experience can get a totally different perspective, and or feel that because they've watched this, they know everything about this culture, which is oftentimes the biggest issue, because then it becomes more about appropriation, or this idea that I already know, or I've gotten every aspect of this culture from one thing, or the single story, right? And therefore, everything in my life, I'm gonna live my life based on this perspective, and that's not good. That's why I'm more a fan of literature and music, because both of these allow us to, words have a huge impact if you fully understand them. Lyrics have a very big impact, especially when it follows music, because it creates a story that is different, or a shared experience, or shared grievances. That's why lyrics like, if I told you that a flower bloomed in the dark, would you believe it? Right, Kendrick Lamar, right? And you know that because that is something that is shared. Despite it meaning different things to both of us, is something that is shared. And so I think that although movies are great, they tend to only provide one story and not a multitude of perspectives. And oftentimes people grasp one that they prefer and leave all the others behind. But yeah. But I would say TV shows like Luke Cage, Insecure is a great one, Being Mary Jane. There's a huge growth in Black movies, or Black narratives in movies, and which is good. So look them up. You know, Atlanta is a great one. But yes.
Atlanta for sure. If you have not seen Atlanta, I highly advise you to watch Atlanta, please. But before we end the discussion, I want to ask one more question. Mm-hmm. How do you believe we should stamp out racism as people of color and people who are supporters of white or Mexican or even other nationality? That's a loaded question.
Another loaded question. I think that language matters. Language, the way that we use language is very important, because language is a man-made construct that is utilized often to diminish other perspectives, or to say that the English language is the proper language, or is the only way to look at the world, is wrong. That's why words like the N-word or racism itself, all these words construct or create our sense of reality. And so it's important to read and educate ourselves as Black bodies, to put back into to our society or to our culture, and enrich that with our knowledge. And it is also important to share that with each other, but also to understand that there is no way to educate the white population unless they're willing to partake in it. You can't force someone to do something, and we're getting tired because we're forcing. We're trying to share this thing that we know is so real to us that is often considered not real. And so, in order to stop this, we need to start focusing on the Black community, the individuals who are hurt, who are angry, who are tired, because we need to strengthen ourselves and strengthen our core values, because that's the only way I think that we can really make an impact. Be as loud as all the other voices in the crowd, yeah.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you again for being on my show today.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
Next episode of The Race Report, I will be discussing race in sports as well as the shooting incidents recently this year. I'm Jordan Brown. This is Race Report. Stay woke.